Welcome to our Office Hours show. As always, this is where you can submit questions about media and production 24/7. If you're watching on YouTube, you can use this QR code, the one that should show up. Oops, if I touch the button over here, and I am ill-prepared for that, I apologize. Here is your QR code down in the corner. That QR code will take you into askofficehours.global. That's kind of the portal you can use to add quick questions into the show so that you can help drive the conversation about what's happening and kind of get into the community. If you have not been at Office Hours before, you can also just go to our main website, www.officehours.global.com, officehours.global. Yeah, I'm messing it up. Anyway, that'll help you kind of get into the run of things. It is Monday, which today happens to coincide with the opening of the annual Apple Worldwide Developers Conference. And in our second hour today, we'll be doing live coverage of the event with one of our second ear shows. More on that at the end of the first hour. But for right now, it's time for your questions. That's what really drives our show. So let's dive in. Alexander, what do our viewers and listeners have on their minds today?
Our first one this morning is from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everyone. Is there a successful way the panel has remotely controlled a keynote presentation with companion or the like? Asking for a desperate friend.
Well, your desperate friend is lucky because Alex Lindsay can help you out.
Well, and I guess the question is, when you say remotely, how remote? Is it like another room further away or another country, another continent? Like those are the things that you want to think about related to that. As far as, remotely controlling a presentation, a lot of times we're not using really companion for those things. I mean, you can, and you can definitely tie those into keystrokes and so on and so forth. Most of these are driven by keystrokes. You have to remember there's a couple different things that can be done. Number one is keynotes can be shared, and then there can be a remote presenter that can actually just open up their keynote and run it'll load locally for you if you're doing for the show, and when they go forward on theirs, it'll go forward on yours. And so that's like you don't need to do anything special. That just works. Now, if you're trying to talk back to that computer and run it for them, or you're trying to run it there, that gets a little bit more complicated. So there are a few ways that we've done it. There are a variety of tools, and I just wasn't quite able to pull them up before the show, but there are a variety of tools that will let you take a USB connection and then broadcast it over IP, and then bring it back in and turn it back into a USB connection. I just can't think of the name of it right now, but that's what you're looking for. That's one way to do it. And in those cases, we've used perfect cues on one side. We have speakers that really want the pickle. They want their little thing that they're used to all the time, but they're sitting at their desk, and that's just what they're used to using. So they use a perfect cue, and then we convert that perfect cue's input to IP, completely separate from their computer, and it comes in and it turns into a signal for us. Now, most of the time, what we do when they do that is the perfect cue. We have it signal to us that we want to do something. We don't actually do it. We have somebody locally pushing the button rather than having, and that's a pretty common thing to do with speakers, is have a perfect cue or something else tell you that they want to go forward, but not actually go forward. And the reason for that is that it allows the operator to make sure that everything's ready to go and everything's going to go the way it needs to go, and they don't double click or other things like that. Now, there are some internet tools that make this possible as well. You can see this is Internet Clicker. There's another one called Clicker here. These are both designed to basically deliver those clicks back and forth to it. So that might be possible as well. As far as tying into companion, it's probably not the way. I think the companion is probably overbuilt for this specific mission, but you probably could do it with a little work.
Courtney Gooden, you have some follow-ups.
Well, yeah, I have a follow-up question for Alex. Is I've never heard of the dual presenter mode, but when you put it in that mode, how do the two computers communicate? Do they communicate over Wi-Fi, over networking, or
over the internet?
So it's an IP address, basically. Yeah. So would you have to use a VPN? Does it have to be a local area network?
Nope. It is. We did this in early Office Hours days. We had a couple presentations that we did this way from Europe, and so basically it's shared as a remote presentation. So what it does is Keynote will cache the entire presentation on. It can not just be one; it can be many remote computers. So
including graphics and video and everything else. Huh?
It moves it all over to your. So you download it. So if it's a 500 meg file, it's just going to download 500 megs onto your drive, and it's going to move through it. That way, it's perfectly smooth. And it's for someone who wants to present to not just, we use it to do it remote and put it into broadcast, but it's really designed for someone, I want to do a presentation for 20 people. I want that presentation to look great. I don't want to stream it through something else. And it opens up as a window, and they can just sit there and watch it. But it's playing the assets locally so that you get all the animations and playback and everything else the way you want it to, locally there. So I don't know if I would use that for a regular presentation, because a lot of times you have a mixed group of people that are not all Apple or whatever. So I tend to want to stream it to them over Zoom or something else. But the advantage there is that if everyone's on a Mac, it works great. But what we can do is we use it for remote broadcast. We have in the past.
And in that situation, does either end have control? Can either end trigger
it's
the next
it's
slide,
the person who's
slide?
running. It's not either end. It's the person who's running their presentation that controls it for everyone.
Handy if they could have dual control, kind of like the remote software on the ATEM Switchers, so that if the presenter screws up and misses a slide, somebody else can go, oh, here.
Yeah, I mean,
for them,
I think that it is a. I think that in general, it's better if you're doing it into a broadcast to think of. You stop thinking about it as a presentation. You start thinking about it as an event, and now you have an operator that someone's going to be listening to you, that's coordinating with you and doing it. When you have a lot of people, I mean and I don't know how Mike is using it, so it's all dependent on how he puts it together. I think for a lot of the stuff that I work on, we want to move away from we often want to move away from the people presenting actually doing their own presentation unless they're really, really good at it. We want to have we have the slides, and we're listening to them and putting them up as needed, and then adding all the other graphics and stuff to it to make it look good. So it's a little less. Once you start talking about companion, I kind of feel like you're getting into a bigger show. And once you get into a bigger show, you take the presentation away from the presenters.
Yeah, exactly. You want somebody else to run it. Yeah.
It's because it's so easy for them. It's, what you're trying to do is, and a lot of people don't pay attention to this, but everything is about having the speaker be present, and being able to just say what they want to say. And so some of that comes from practice, but dealing with the details of their presentation is usually a great way to create lots of mental commas, in what they're doing. And that's what we're trying to avoid typically, is a long line of commas as they try to figure out why something's they're in the wrong slide, or they're doing the thing, or they're just thinking about it. And again, it's I think that we're paying more attention now to our presentations because they actually have to work. When you do them online, when you do them in person, everyone showed up for the bagels and the coffee and everything else, and you can get away with a lot of text and a poorly run presentation, and because people are checking their email and they're looking at whatever on their phone. When you do it online, you have your level of performance has to be much better because they have a lot of other things they can do.
But it does require rehearsal with the person who's running it, though.
Anything that matters requires rehearsal.
Yeah.
So anything that matters, like anything that matters in front of a lot of people requires a rehearsal, in my opinion. So
there you go. All right, let's slip off to the next question.
From the QR code, Kane Trouble in Mildura, Australia asks, ATEM Switchers version 9.5 has added SRT support and webcam out source options. If you listen carefully, you can hear the sting button crying quietly to itself.
Jason Bass is going to help us out. Jason?
Yeah, actually, I really I like using the stinger button, and there's still one use case for it that you need a hyperdeck for, but you can actually set the hyperdeck to be your stinger, so you can set it to play the minute you hit that transition, and it will just play and then rewind and be ready to do it again. And but yeah, it's kind of falling out of fashion.
Courtney, your thoughts?
Yeah, the reason I think they put that stinger button on there, they were planning to increase the amount of local RAM in the eventually in the ATEMs, but they never did. And since they can't really change hardware via a software update, there's not enough RAM to run multiple stingers, or even a long stinger in the ATEMs right now to store your stinger video in RAM. So that's why it still sits lonely by itself.
Alex, your thoughts?
And I don't know how it relates to the sting button, but what I will say is that there's one thing that I read that I just haven't had time to deal with inside of Resolve 19, which just came out last week, is a very complex interaction between Resolve and the hardware. I don't know if I'm sold on it, but it does appear that Resolve, there's playback, there's replay possibilities, but there's stingers are part of what Resolve is theoretically delivering or can deliver back to it. And so I don't know, again, it's a weird thing to take this big piece of software. It feels like you're taking your kids to school in a tractor trailer truck, but it is like, we'll see how it turns out. But I think we want to track this interaction between, I feel like the problem is that Blackmagic has this piece of software and they figured, well, we'll just clump this in because we already have, it does a lot of this stuff and we'll clump it into the live hardware. I don't understand quite, it just seems like a really weird connection. I feel like you want to build a mission specific thing, but some of the stinging operations, replay operations and stuff like that are getting added to Resolve as well. So you want to keep your eye on that.
Let's move on to the next question.
Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas asks, demonstrate how to configure a VLAN ID, virtual local area network, subnet range, DNS, DHCP server, and DHCP options on a Ubiquiti Dream Machine SE and other DM models.
I was going to say, I don't think anybody has a demo, but Jason may talk about it for a little bit. Jason?
No possible way to do that in 2 minutes. Like no absolute possible way. Let me see. Can I do this without even running and showing my IP address? No, actually, now that I think about it, I can't. So long story short, run your updates, turn on DHCP. Your subnet should just simply be 255.255.255.0. That'll give you 249 usable. And that, yeah, no, I'm sorry. There isn't time for that.
Paul, sometimes demos do take a little preparation. I'm just saying. Alex, you had some notes?
Yeah, demonstrate's a big word for the morning show. But also, just a quick reminder that our foundational day is on Friday, where we have a lot of IT experts there. So if you want to ask more general questions about this, Friday's a great day to do that.
All right, let's slip ahead to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, my Yamaha DM3 has A.Gain, analog and digital, with a synth connected to an analog input and A.Gain at +12. I see a slight red peaks on A.Gain, but no D.Gain overs. Which gain is key? This is similar to the TF series.
Alexander Knight, did you want to dive into this a little deeper?
Yeah, so as you already found out there, you got two different gain stages. You got your analog domain, you got your digital domain. So generally, I don't have any reason to add. I don't think I've ever really used digital gain because if the analog preamps are good, you should have enough. You should have enough gain for the device going in. Now, generally with gain staging, you want to make sure. Now, for me, when I'm working with a digital mixer, and this is not something unique to me. Plenty of live sound mixers do this, but I like to get everything to -18. That's the level that I like to work with on digital mixers. That gives me tons and tons of headroom to work with. With analog mixers, it's a little bit different. If you're working with something high-end like a Neve or an SSL and you want to get a little more saturation, you can push it harder. I wouldn't do that necessarily with a digital mixer, so you shouldn't really be getting your meters to go into the red. So you may want to try standardizing on -18. And those preamps on the Yamaha DM3 are pretty clean.
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, Nikki said that all gain stages are important. The analog gain stage should always be set to a safe and conservative level, as there is no fixing a clipped AD converter. In the digital realm, you are protected by the mix engine's operating bit depth. I believe the DM3's engine is a 64-bit.
Alexander, do you want to come back in for a second?
Yeah, and one more thing, and Douglas, I don't know if you're using this in a recording scenario or a live sound, so I'm just going to speak to just one aspect of live sound. One of the mistakes I always see people make is when they set their faders up and they start doing their sound checks, if they need to turn down the PA, they turn it down in the wrong spot. You should never be turning it down at the preamp stage. This is also why a lot of us standardize at -18. So you put all your faders at unity gain, including your main output fader. Get your levels all set to around -18. And if you need to turn down the PA, this is why also we work with matrix outputs too. So I have my left and right output set to my matrix output. And if I need to shade the PA, I'm doing it at a matrix. I'm not touching the master fader. I'm not touching the faders on the input channels. I'm not touching the preamp gain. It's all done way later further down the chain.
And just my experience, when I was coming up from the analog world into digital, we used to push analog signal faders and things really pretty hard because there was an area of soft clipping that was almost sounded like compression. It was very pleasing for people. So you'd always run kind of a little in the red, sometimes even above that. Boy, when I switched to digital and tried to do the same thing, I learned really quickly when you run out of bits, your whole signal just falls to pieces. So I could hear clipping as just a horrible, consistent coming over sound that I got to stay away from that. So I had to change my entire thinking, which is why I think the levels are so much lower, that -18, -24 in the case of some broadcast requirements I have, -16. I hear all those at the same time. Nobody wants to get over 0 because it's just a disaster in the digital world. So my 2 cents worth. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question is for me. Does anyone have anything to report with SRT testing on the new ATEM 9.5 update?
Guy Cochran.
So I haven't tested it specifically, but in the past I have set up a group where you can see these numbers down in the bottom corners that say like 9001. That would be the port number. And you could see some folks from the community, in the office hours community, that are in this test where in OBS and whatever else that you had that was SRT, we would say during these hours, go ahead and send up your feed. So if there's enough interest, I can go ahead and fire this back up. This basically is a vMix Cloud instance, and I just give everybody the address and they can send up their feeds. So if people want to test it out, let me know, and it's not that hard to turn this on.
Guy, that's incredibly generous of you. Thank you. So anybody who wants to do testing, Guy is raising his hand to volunteer. Let's go to the next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania asks, I used Birddog P200s with NDI for college sports at less than $1,300. I'd like to add another one, but I'm concerned all the changes at Birddog. Should I be looking at other vendors? What are some good alternatives?
And Guy's going to come right back and help us, Guy.
Yeah, so the P200 is actually a Bolin camera, and so Bolin has kind of stepped away from Birddog. They're in the middle of a lawsuit right now, and Bolin is now partnering up with Magewell and putting NDI. So the deal before was that Birddog would handle the NDI versions. If you look at the P200 on the side of it, it says Bolin. And I'm going to be at Infocomm, and I'll go ask these guys. And if you want to jump in this week, I'll stop by their booth and you could ask them. But I wouldn't throw good money after bad. I would probably buy this Bolin right here, which is the same P200, and then get it with the guys that are a little bit stronger. So I think Bolin's a stronger partner than Birddog at this point. So the Magewell collaboration is a better way to roll. I don't think I'd throw good money after bad if you're going to maintain that P200 line. It's tough to say that because I got friends there, but that's the truth.
All right, let's go on to our next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada, and from the QR code asks, have any of the panelists gone back and looked at earlier office hours recordings to see what might have made it work? And is there anything we've moved away from that we miss?
4 years, and I avoid looking back at myself from 4 years ago at all costs.
Yeah,
Alex?
I have to say that I'm number one is this is normally a Sunday. We made an exception for Craig because it came in yesterday and everything else. It's normally a Sunday question, so we won't answer these very often during the week. But I decided to make an exception here. It came in on a QR code. I'm not very past oriented, so I almost never look backwards. Like I'm looking at where I'm at now and where I want to go, and I'm just constantly moving. So it's very rare for me to look into the past for very long. It's done. That said, in the handful of times that I have gone back, generally just watching the show is incredibly painful for me if I go back more than a couple of years, just because of just the ricketiness of how we were doing it before. So I think that it's so I think that's the issue. I think that it was great to have, I think there's a lot of people we'd love to see come back as panelists and be on the panel, to be part of the conversation. So I think that's the one thing that I enjoy is when we have 8, 10, 12, panelists, especially some of the ones like Craig, who asked this question, which is why we made that. I'm trying to persuade Craig to come back and join us on a couple days here and there. So I think that having some of the panelists I miss, as far as the show, if I go back more than a couple of years, there's not a lot I miss from that.
I agree with you. I miss the people a lot. There have been so many people that have come through here. And I do think the core of the show, the idea of we will just show up every day and answer questions from people, that magic is still there in some of the early ones. But the look, the appearance, the technical back end, the amount of expertise that was brought to the panel, it has gotten nothing but better over the course of every year of the 4 years we've been here, and I'm just really proud to be associated with any of this and any of you people who have ever touched this show. It's been fabulous, and thanks, Alex, for putting it together. Guy, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, a lot of the folks are just out there working. I mean, I'm working with them, and so I see how they operate, and they make good money, and they got equipment to pay for and staff now, and so it's a luxury to be able to come on. And so I appreciate when folks that we don't see that often, the Jeff Keithleys and Jonases and Grants, because I work with all those guys, and they're out there humping it. And Noah Sargent, like he bought all those FR7s. You gotta maintain, you gotta keep those things rolling. You can't be jumping on a show every day unless you have a business model that can support that. Which, I mean, some people can figure it out, but usually you get into a management role where you're having the other folks go do the stuff. But I love being out there because it gives you this mix of what's going on out in the field, what's reality, and then we come back in here and talk about it. So I love the mix. So Craig, come on back. Some folks at least come in once a week and share your knowledge, because I think that's the benefit of this group, is sharing that real world knowledge.
And the whole global side of it. I miss guys like Beju, and we had so many people in from so much of the world during the pandemic when everybody was kind of shut down. Alex, last thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that the hard part is always that when you are busy, the mistake that I made long ago with Pixel Core is that I got really busy with a lot of production, and I didn't keep on pushing back into the community that I built that looked very much like office hours. And the thing is that the thing that when I look back on it, I wish I had done more of that and taken more of the time. Now I'm in the real world, and I'm going to come back and keep on handing you stuff, because that builds this connection to all these people around you, so that when things are slow again, you're building that connection. You're that kind of karmic connection with lots of people, sharing what you know with them on a regular basis, and you never know when you need it. So I think that's the benefit of coming back, and hopefully we'll have people come back, once a month. Just come in and say hi, even on the weekends. It'd be fun to see a lot of the old panelists. Let's go to the next question. Oh, I'm not host.
We are going to go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, how can NBC receive 4K HDR video and return comms for the live IMAX broadcast of the Olympic opening ceremony from moving boats in a dense RF environment? Wouldn't LiveU have problems as the cellular networks got more congested?
Playing up in the really big leagues. Courtney, what are your thoughts?
Well, the networks for years have been using, point-to-point microwave for situations like this. These kind of systems like Avon Air have a directional microwave dish on one end, and then your transmitter on the other end can either have a dish or just have a regular omnidirectional transmission. But these kind of transmissions are designed for studio transmitter links and things like that. We used to use them for the blimp for broadcasts, when they used to broadcast live video from the blimp. And this supports all kinds of resolutions. It even has CCU back to the camera control over the link as well. So this is probably something like what the networks are using. And remember, if you're on a boat over water, that's the easiest way to transmit RF because it's always flat. Water seeks its own level usually. And so you have much farther range over water than you do over land, where there's usually a lot of obstruction. So it's easier to hit a boat on the water, and you could even put somebody on the dish on the receiver end to track the boat and to make sure the reception stays strong.
Alex?
The Vislink, which we used for NAB, has, number one, is its licensed frequencies, and so congestion doesn't matter when you don't have to play with everybody else. so licensed frequencies mean we're outside of everybody else's frequency. We got plenty of room around our frequencies, and we're able to manage that. So congested RF isn't really that big of a deal for those types of things. Number two is the vast majority of the cameras are going to be wired, so they're going to wire those with SMPTE fiber or something like it to make sure that most of your show is you only use wireless where you have to, and so where you're running around where that happens, you'll use wireless. But outside of that, almost all the cameras. So if something goes off, and it does, you lose a wireless connection for a variety of reasons, you are going to have plenty of other cameras to go to, and you'll usually see it if it's problematic. If they're in a problematic place, they're not going to cut to it. The comms, the Vislinks, for instance, return those comms. It has a comm return in it, so you can actually get those comms back in that transmitter. So these are these are a bunch of things that they're most likely going to use there. As far as the transport to be distributed to IMAX or anyone else, that usually comes back to the United States actually over fiber. So that's going to come back to the to NBC, and they're going to then do the distribution typically from the U.S. It can be done from Paris as well, but that's usually over fiber. And companies like the Switch really manage a huge amount of those things. But LiveUs oftentimes are used by some of the broadcasters as kind of a last ditch or something that they're moving around. But generally, in the places where it really matters, they're using a lot of licensed wireless and fiber.
Let's move to the next question.
Robert Green in Los Angeles asks, 10 gig fiber to the home. What can you do with all that bandwidth?
So many answers. Guy Cochran, give us a bunch.
So right now I'm doing one thing, which is I'm running 5 gig. So Ziply Fiber is the fastest internet in America, and they're coming here in a few minutes to upgrade me to 10 gig. So I think Robert heard me talking about it in the pre-show. Basically, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm hosting these Zoom meetings that I can let other people run them 24/7. So let's jump over to this machine here. You'll be able to see this is reloading. It's reloading right now. Basically, we're running Oliver's Mac Ultra over here so that we can push out 8 feeds 24 hours a day. The thing that I would love to do is host NDI Bridge for other folks. So that, let's say, for instance, office hours here, this show, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us. 8. And then if we did NDI Bridge out of here, we could have other people pull this show in and be able to cut a version of the show, but that's 16 megabits a second. To do that at H.264, you could slide this slider down to whatever you want. But in the future, I'd love to be able to give folks feeds. So we pull them in via Zoom, but then I can kick them back out NDI. And so somebody else with NDI Bridge can suck them down. So this can be for not just Zoom, but it can be for other things as well, SRT to NDI. But it takes a big fat pipe. So I'm going to go up to 10,000 megabits, and we'll see how it goes.
More plumbing, more often. Nigel.
I feel like with only 2.5 gig, I'm somehow now behind everyone else. The only point I wanted to make was, I know lots of people have been upgrading to these faster systems, but don't forget you have to do the rest of your network as well. There's no point having a very fat pipe come into your house and then go into a very thin pipe around your house. So if you're looking to upgrade to one of these, really remember you may have to, if you're just using the standard modem or router that comes from your provider, what does it go into next? You've got to think that all the way through the network. Otherwise, you got all that speed and you won't see it.
Start pulling fiber, guys. Guy?
Yeah, so the other idea is along that same vein where we're talking about putting 20 Mac Studios here with each having a 2.5 gig NIC. So built into the Mac Studios is 10 gig, but Ubiquiti has some really inexpensive switches that I have one here that goes 10 gig in and then it's 2.5 gig out. You can also do other ones that are 100 gig and 25 gig and all that. But basically, we want to have editors share a Synology drive, because what's really expensive in AWS is the egress. So when you're spitting back out, you're getting charged for every megabit that goes out. So I'm trying to find folks like that don't have a huge requirement to be up. If we went down, it wouldn't be the end of the world, more like a backup. But for folks that want to just do some rough edits, we could have the storage here, or we could back up their entire library here. I could have a petabyte of storage here and standby generator and UPSs and all that stuff. But basically, if my fiber line got cut, then we'd be out. But it's saving some of these folks that have like TriCasters in a data center here locally $500 a month for a 1 gig connection, which is a joke. I mean, $500 for a 1 gig, that's crazy. But that's in a commercial facility with security and all that stuff. So there's a lot to consider there. I mean, I don't know how much I want to fortify my house having 10 gig going in it, versus, I don't want to keep military secrets here or something, or somebody's going to come, with a tank to my door. So at some point you got to draw the line as to who you can host.
Let's go to the next question.
Rion Smith in Trinidad, West Indies asks, how do I get SRT option in my YouTube turned on? Wait.
Alex?
I don't think that's publicly available yet. YouTube is rolling out tests around SRT as a delivery tool, as an ingest for YouTube, but I don't believe that is. I think that's an invite only test right now. So I think that if you're looking for the other things that YouTube's working on a lot of different ways of ingest, but I don't believe that SRT has been rolled out, unless maybe it has and I missed it. Someone didn't send me the memo, but the as far as delivery goes, but HLS and RTMP is also other ways to do the new versions of ingest.
Guy?
Yeah, last January, actually the January before, January 2023, Keenan and I, through some folks here in office hours and after hours, they were talking about SRT to YouTube, and they happen to work for YouTube. So this is why it's a great community here, because they said, hey, ping me on LinkedIn, and I'll dial you in with SRT beta. So Keenan and I went to CES, and we shot SRT. We were probably the first people in the world outside of YouTube to shoot SRT into YouTube. So I have access to the first round of beta, but that was, again, through an ask. There's a second wave that's different, and that one I believe is a little more looser to get into. I have the sheet. I don't think I can publicly give out the link that has that. So Brian, contact me in Discord, and I'll see what I can dig up, and I'll ask the person internally to see what I can and cannot do for giving requests out.
Nice. Let's head to our next question.
Next one's from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Discuss the Williams AV assisted listening debuting at Infocomm.
There's a link there for it. Courtney, what do you think?
Well, I took a look at it. This is for assistive listening for a group of people who have hearing issues. This is there's a digital loop system, or not a digital loop. I guess it is a digital loop, but it is just an old loop. This is actually an analog transmission, because it uses an inductive loop. So it's just a big Class A amplifier that you put a big induction loop around a room for a small room, so that anyone with hearing aids that are compliant with inductive pickup for telephone receivers, et cetera, would be able to hear things over their hearing aids. They also make that DigiWave ACM-based comm system for communications for cameras and so on, point to point. And they make an infrared system, which is the old line of sight transmission for people with assistive listening headphones that you can put on that receive the audio via an infrared transmitter in the room to multiple receivers with usually a little pickup on the top of the headset, so that you always remain in a line of sight. So they have a selection of type of devices for the hearing disabled.
It's the first time I ever had IFB, and they gave me one of those old hang this around your neck, and it looked like a giant kind of rope, about 1/4 of an inch thick, and then one of the little teeny tiny earbuds, and that's how the system worked. Inductive hearing. It was okay, worked just fine. So there are those out there. Let's go to the next question.
Next question comes from Dan K. from Macomb, Michigan, and this is from the QR code. Hey, Alex, I just listened to you with Leo on Ask the Tech Guys, and I especially loved hearing some behind-the-scenes stories of working on the Phantom Menace. What was the most difficult scene to complete, and did you get to keep the Rum Sleg costume?
Alex?
No, I did not get to keep the costume. I had some pictures. I had to do a T-pose with the costume on. I wish I still had that photo, but that's what they used to build the little action figure. This little dude here is actually based on my T-pose that was there that I had to wear. As far as the hardest, I think the one that is probably the hardest, the one that took me the longest anyway, is there's a shot, and you'll see it in the trailer, of the Queen ship going over Coruscant. So it's it's a whip pan where it kind of goes like this, and you see the ship kind of does a turn when it goes past it, and that the planet behind it was done by Brian Flores. That was a matte painting, that was there. But my job was to do all the traffic. So all of those little ships had were particle systems. So I had to model and build, and I modeled all those ships, and I put them all in as a particle system, so they'd be emitted, and they had to be emitted in in lanes, going around it. So there was a lot of building that up. And then the Queen ship was about 22 passes of rendering that was then composited in After Effects. And because it came by the camera so closely, instead of using regular motion blur, that was one of the challenges, is because it would blur the reflection, and you don't want it to blur the reflection. Reflections don't blur, so you want the details of the ship to blur, but you want the reflection to remain what it is. And to do that, what we had to do is multi-frame rendering. And so what you have to do is you render out a certain number of frames per frame. And in this case, I rendered 48 frames per frame. So it had to render the reflection 48 times to build every frame, which took a long time. It was a particularly long shot. So people would be like, "Why is it taking you so long?" It took me about 9 weeks to do it. And it said, "Why is it taking you so long?" And I'm like, "Well, it's 230 frames." And they're like, 230 frames. Like, most of our shots are like 24 frames and 32 frames. 230 frames is a long time when you're doing computer graphics in the late 90s. And so the multi-frame made it difficult because it's also becoming so close. I had multiple versions of reflection. So there was a sharper reflection that was there, but then you had to have reflection of where oil and other things were on the bottom of the ship. So those were blurred reflections, and I did those in the reflections themselves to composite them back in. And then there were multiple specular passes. These are the little shiny areas and everything else. And then once you get those, you treat them separately. So some of them, one of the funny things about dust, by the way, is that when you look at dust across a surface, it'll have a bunch of, the particulate will actually pick up faster than the rest of the surface because it's actually just a little above it. So you'll see a dust layer light up on a surface, and then you'll see the surface get lit up. And so building texture maps that allowed me to represent that on the Queen ship took a little bit of time, to get that kind of, because those dust layers and everything else create the feeling of scale. The big problem with the Queen ship was having it feel like it was bigger. And I felt like that was a pretty good, that was probably one of my better shots that I worked on. But it took a long time, and I almost had a nervous breakdown. So there was one point.
On your resume, you could put world's first open space traffic controller and legitimately have a claim to that.
There was one point where I was really stressed out. I was super stressed out because I was like weeks late, and I'm trying to get this thing done, and you could just tell that I was like completely getting buried into this thing and getting very upset. And I remember John Knoll, we came out of C Theater, and we were walking out of the back, and John Knoll just looked at me and he said, "Just remember, it's not heart surgery. Like, you're okay. Like, it'll be fine. Like, just do your thing, Like, and it really took all the weight out when the VFX supervisor just tells you, it's not heart surgery, nothing's going wrong here, because he could just tell I was wound super tight about 6 or 7 weeks in, and but anyway, I got the shot. It's probably the shot I'm the most proud of that I worked on there. There's a lot of other ones. There's a couple that I'm not proud of. They got finaled before they really needed to be. So anyway, there you go.
Alexander, not yet. A follow-up thought?
Yeah, I had a couple technical questions about the rendering. So when you were doing the rendering, was that done on a single, like your own workstation? Or did that go to some server farm? And also, what computers were you using for that?
Yeah, so I can't remember. I actually can't remember. I think I was 7100s that we had there. So these were, if I remember correctly, I feel like they must have been newer than 7100s, but what jumps into my head is 7100s. The 840 AV was out, but I don't think we had those. John had an 840 AV. He had one at home, but I don't think, and I think we might have been past that. But anyway, some of us had some power PCs. It was kind of in that era. But so the rest of ILM ran off of Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti is this giant rendering system. So basically, what you would do if you wanted to render something, you'd log it in. I'm just going to give you an overview because I never had to do this. But if you're using RenderMan or Mental Ray, you would log it in, and what it would do, it was an incredible system for everyone working in CG. So I was part of the Rebel Mac unit, so we all had our own Mac, and I did write a proposal that I think a lot of people wasn't popular in my group because I asked for a second computer so that we could render to it while we were working, and that reduced a lot of our coffee breaks. so anyway, so what CG did is you'd have people working on the envelopes. That's like how the bones connect to everything. There'd be other people doing the animation, people working on the textures, people working on the simulations for Jar Jar's ears, people working on the lighting, the layout, the textures, the matte paintings. Everything would all be built by different. You have 20 or 30 people working on the same shot at the same time. When you logged it in and hit go, it would go grab the newest model with the newest envelope it would just grab all the newest things and just start rendering frames. And the reason dailies was so important is no one knew what it looked like until it came out the other end. I mean, the animation would have triggered some simulation problem, and Jar Jar's ears would start flapping all over the place, and there'd be all these things that happened. So their version of it, and then what it would do is there's about 2,000 processors that were just dedicated to rendering, but it would use every SGI processor it could get a hold of. So if the screensaver on the SGI machines, on the Indies and the Octanes, the screensaver would tell the system, "Hey, I'm available." So if you went to lunch, it would just start throwing frames at you. And when you went home, it would just start using frames. And that system got built up because ILM learned to start charging for render time. And when they started charging for render time, it meant that they had a huge budget to make everything better all the time. so it's part of what made it go. But for us, though, most of our stuff was rendered on our own machine. And so what you'd calculate is you'd render out what my day normally looked like is I would render, I would get in the morning. I'd see what I had rendered overnight. So I would render out all these layers in electric image, to my drive. So I'd have all these, all the, passes would be out there. So the passes would be out there, and then I'd bring them into After Effects and I'd line them all up. Usually there was already a document, so all I had to do was replace. If it was the same shot, all I had to do was just replace all the files. And so I'd replace them all. I'd do some spot checks on it, and I'd come in about a half an hour before dailies, which I think, if I remember correctly, was 8:00. Anyway, so I'd come in about 7:30 in the morning. I'd spot check them all, make sure it's going. Then I hit render. Then I'd go to dailies. So dailies was 8:30 because I think it was a union thing, like 8:30 to 6:30 or something like that. So dailies was at 8:30, but I came in at 7:30. Of course, if you're watching from local 16, of course I didn't do that. I just did it in my dreams. I never came in an hour early without charging for it. So anyway, I spot checked my stuff and then hit render, and then I'd go get a coffee and go to dailies. And by the time I got back from dailies, the shot would be rendered. It'd be 9:00 in the morning or 9:30 in the morning to be rendered. John would come through at about 10:30 in the morning. And so what I would do is I'd look at my shot over and over and over again, and I'd write a list down on a legal pad of all the things I think still need to be done for this shot to be perfect and done and ready to go to film out. And so I'd write all this stuff down, and John would come in. And at first he would just give me the input, but then after a while I learned to do that, and then he'd go, because it helped me figure out what he thought was important. Because he would look at my list and he'd go, "Yeah, do that. Don't worry about that." But and then he would add something, and that was a learning thing for me to, okay, I got to pay attention to that. So I would use it as a way to kind of Marco Polo his eye, so that I was serving what he wanted. And so then anyway, so I would do that and then I would make all the changes in the morning, and then I'd go to lunch. Lunch was 12:30 to 1:30 or whatever. So at 12:30 I would send out, do like a little postage stamp render. So I'd render out a couple stills, and I'd render this little animation about this big, because otherwise it wouldn't be done when I got back from lunch. so then I got back from lunch, and I would do another one, and then I would do another postage stamp about 2:30 or 3 of all the things, and do some test renders and everything else of all the changes. And then at about 4:30 or 5:00 or something like that, somewhere in that range, I'd start setting up my renders for the night. So I would start lining up this is all the renders that I have, and and I had this little checklist of like it was 22. Shoddy Almasazada later made it much simpler. I still think mine looks better. Anyway, so anyways, Shoddy's watching, so it's open. But anyway, but he made it much easier to render. But mine was 22 layers, and the advantage of rendering all those layers was that I could go into After Effects and change every attribute for every show, and it wasn't I would sit there and tweak everything in real time while I'm in After Effects instead of rendering it out and hoping it turned out well. So So then I'd set up all those renders, and I'd finish about 6:15, 6:20 if I did it well. And then, because the day ended, the union day ended at 6:30, so I would usually then hit render on it on somewhere between 6:15 and 6:30. I'd hit render and go home, and then I'd come back the next day and repeat. And that was pretty much my day. Like my days looked like that most days. There was not a lot of change other than the shot, and most shots took about a week. But that one took about 9 weeks.
Great. Let's go on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, in the wake of Twitch exiting the Korean market, Korean streaming platforms, Afreeca /SOOP and Naver /CHZZK will be going global. With Korea being a force in the gaming /eSports world, will this fragment audiences? Discuss.
Nigel, start us off.
Well, for people who aren't following along at home, Twitch, who is owned by Amazon, has withdrawn from the South Korean market. I don't think it's in the North Korean market. The South Korean market, because of something that's known as sending party pay models, which means that if you are sending a huge amount of data through the ISP at some point goes, I think you should pay more. We had a bit of a fight about this in the US called net neutrality, which I think will come back again fairly soon and continue to go. But I think this is the start of what is going to be a continuing debate, nationalism around networking. I think we're seeing it in Europe. They're going after Apple to protect Spotify and people like that. And I think, particularly where the ISPs are really connected to the national government. And the ISPs are going to force people to pay. So when you were at home watching the Squid Game, you were part of a problem, and that's particularly what caused this strangely to really become an issue in South Korea. I think we're going to see lots of this, as I said. I think it's going to go ups and downs. But what I do believe, as it says in the great Jurassic Park, nature will find a way, and smart people will find a way. And I think that smart people will innovate their way around this, and we won't lose the South Korean gamers. But expect to see a lot more of this, and don't get particularly put off by one particular action. There's a lot going on, and at some point it'll work its way through.
Alex.
Yes, it's interesting. I think that it's not about money. Obviously, Amazon has the money. Amazon just wasn't willing to pay for it. Like they didn't feel like there's this idea that if you're using the ISPs feel like they should get paid more. And the argument is, well, you got a bunch of people that you're already charging retail for that connection. You're already getting money for it. You're just trying to get paid twice. And so, as JJ points out in our forum, the carrier interconnect agreements had a pretty big bout regarding this in Netflix about 10 years ago. So. A lot of this was, the carriers in the United States wanted to get paid more too for those interconnects, and push back and forth. Then you have some folks like Netflix, which is all, they were a subscription service trying to fight through this. Then you have other companies like Apple that are just willing to pay it. Like they're just like that's part of their edge is that they can just afford to pay that, and so they would just pay through that. And those interconnects are the reason the interconnect agreements and the cost of those interconnect agreements and all of the peering that is done is why you really can't start your own CDN anymore. Like you couldn't do what these you're going to use somebody's service because starting it up from scratch is pretty messy. It'll be interesting to see how well Korea does now that Twitch has been pulled away. Twitch was a pretty big deal there, and I think that Amazon thought that they could remove it and destabilize that market, and we don't know yet. We just don't know whether it'll destabilize their gaming market or not. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Let's go to the next question.
Next one's for me. If you have plenty of bandwidth, is there any reason to switch from RTMP to SRT?
Guy, what do you think?
It depends on what you're doing. If you're going straight to YouTube and it's working for you, then keep going with it. Over the years, you're going to start to see YouTube, it's going to do RTMP Plus, which allows for other codecs like HEVC H.265 to be utilized, because RTMP is ancient. It's from the Flash days. It's carried over. So we'll use SRT a lot with hardware to shoot up to our vMix cloud instances or SRT mini server, and then we turn it around and we'll send back to YouTube RTMP after we do our 2-ups, 3-ups graphics, PowerPoints, video records, all that. So it just depends on where you're going from and to, because RTMP is basically TCP, and it's just shooting out packets, just and it doesn't care if they're being received or not. It's just spraying packets. So with UDP, with SRT, you could basically get an acknowledgement that that packet has arrived, and you can do a buffer. You can increase your latency if things aren't working quite right. You can say go from 1 second to 2 seconds, and now you got an additional latency to play with, and all those packets are for sure coming in. So I don't know if you're going to get an advantage over doing what you're doing. So I would just test, because when you get into SRT, a lot of times you can buy cheap hardware or you can use software, but the expensive stuff, high vision Makitos, are 10 grand. So it just depends on where you're going from and where you're going to. So in the cloud, we're using, like I said, SRT mini server, vMix. High Vision has a product that you can use to turn that around, and it's all very robust broadcast quality. So it's, what do you need to work, and what happens if you fail? So this stuff is meant not to fail, and that's the best stuff. So do you need that level, or do you just want to push a simple stream out? So at the end of the day, it's just test, and what does the picture look like, and is the end viewer happy? But actually, one more, you could use caster.io is a turnaround like Restream. So if you want to shoot SRT into a service provider and turn it back around, caster.io is a great way to do that. So then you can point it to the YouTubes, the Vimeos, the Facebooks, all from one place, and Restream doesn't do that. But that's a nice way to visually see that you're getting a picture from a location if you don't want to fire up an AWS instance and all of that stuff. But yeah, lots of options.
Alex?
And one of the challenges, there is some feedback that is required from RTMP to have it keep sending packets out. And so the problem that you end up with is in some areas, it'll stop sending because it's not getting the return signal, the return signal. So that becomes a challenge in some areas where we tend to use Zixi because it just brute forces that process. Which Zixi is kind of a bigger version of SRT. Some people will disagree, but it's a more flexible version of that. We have to remember that SRT is not a video format. SRT is a transport format, and you can wrap it around anything. So you can send data, you can send audio, you can send video, you can send different kinds of all of those things using that. And so it's a very, very flexible format that gives you a lot more options than what you have just with RTMP. So I don't think that if you're just going straight into YouTube, most of the time RTMP is going to be fine. RTMP is limited in bit rate, bits, color bits, so 8-bit. It's limited to 8 bits and typically 2 channels. eRTMP is designed to fix that, so you should be able to send more channels and a higher bit rate or higher bit depth, to YouTube using eRTMP as it rolls out. Right now, a lot of us use HLS to solve that problem. But I think that SRT, especially if you're doing contribution to an editing system or whatever, SRT is a really popular one. We just used it as a contribution a couple days ago, over the weekend, as contribution. Now, it was a backup to a C-band satellite dish, so it was the second layer, but we did in testing fall over to it because of some stuff. And then we had a LiveU with LRT as the backup to the SRT, which was the backup to the C-band.
Alexander, you want to quicken?
Yeah, I appreciate all the detailed response. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like I don't really need it. I've been live streaming from the ATEM directly, 1080p into YouTube direct over RTMP, and it looks pretty good. I've messed around a little bit with pushing a little bit more bits to get the stream looking a little bit better. But I guess my question is, and it sounds like it won't make a difference, but I was just curious, is there actually a quality difference between the SRT and the art? Like if I was sending the same number of bits as SRT versus RTMP, is it any better? Because I'm always looking for ways to push out better or more quality out to YouTube.
Alex?
The biggest jump in quality that you would have is taking the HDMI output from your ATEM and pumping it into something like either a Elemental Link or even OBS or other things where you have more control over that compression. When you stream, you're going to have the same black crush from the ATEM that you would have that we see in the UVC. So it appears that we see that in both of those places. So that's going to be problematic. And I don't think, from my experience so far streaming from the ATEM switcher, I love the ATEM switchers. We have lots of them. I have lots of them. The streaming quality is not, the streaming interface is one of the best in the world. Like when you open it up on a window and all the data it gives you and how pretty it looks, it's amazing. The quality of the actual bits leaving the ATEM is so at best. Like it's really not, I don't view it as professional quality streaming. I wouldn't stream something that I was getting paid for from an ATEM switcher. It's a backup, but I wouldn't. I would typically use some other tool to do that with, where I had more control.
Guy?
Yeah, I mean, you could crank up our RTMP. We had a while as a Clearcaster where we're doing 4K when that was the first device, and it was 24 megabits. So you could crank up the megabit on RTMP all the way up to 24 megabit and get full 4K out of it. Nowadays, I would use something like an Osprey Talon, which is what we're using on this show, and some of the other SRT encoders. You can buy them, like the Matrox, you can buy it as an 8-bit or you can buy it as a 10-bit. Whether or not you're going to see the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit and is it worth the extra money, you're probably better off just cranking up the actual transport, the megabits per second, to get the best that you can out of it. So if you're streaming at 4 and you went to 8, you're probably going to see a difference. So those kind of things start to matter. I'd play with it a little bit and see if you can even walk it up to 12 or something like that. But stability is what you want. You want to make sure that you're not falling apart because you decide to crank up the bit rate.
Alex, you want to come back in?
Yeah, those higher bit rates is where you want to start looking at SRT or ZXI or other things other than RTMP, because now it's much more fragile as it's bigger. The 10-bit really makes a difference when you have lots of gradients, skies, and if you're deciding you want to go into HDR. Those are things that matter, but you'll start to see posterization. So anytime you start to see that posterization, that's coming from 8-bit or higher compression.
Let's move on, and the next question is for Alec. Go ahead.
So this because we're getting ready for this, and I thought we spent about 3 hours yesterday in 3 hours doing a test of building the stuff. Andy jumped in and we kind of brainstormed it. I'll tell you what didn't work was basically what we have or what we had here is we have.
By
Zoom
the way,
ISO.
this is about our coverage starting in an hour after the show's over.
Yeah,
for
so we had
the
Zoom
WWDC.
ISO. And we're sending all of the video feeds to Mimo Live, and then we're also sending all the audio feeds to Mimo Live into it. As you do that, and then to get the multi-view, we just wanted to use tiles to do that, and so tiles would come in as just another input here. Using just these 3 apps, we were able to get, because remember we have 2 zooms and you got a lot of graphics going on. We were able to get a Mac Studio Max, not an Ultra, to about 96%. so it was
pushing the envelope. Are you?
You were like, hey, your resolution on your video is changing, because it was too much. So what we're doing, which I think is kind of interesting, and a lot of this came from some great input from Andy. So we have Zoom ISO, and what we're doing is we're just taking active speaker out. So we're just taking the active speaker out of Zoom ISO. So it's just going to switch between whoever's talking. And then we also have, we're going to use tiles, for this, and it's going to go in, then these both will go into Mimo. And so basically I'm just switching back and forth between active speaker and that group. And I have, and what's nice about it is that, like, for instance, we had 6 people planned, but we decided to add 2 more today. I did want to keep it in pairs, and so CJ was like, "Hey, can I come in?" And then I was like, "Well, I gotta add it in pairs." And so I pinged Guy, and Guy's going to come into it. So because I just wanted to look a certain way. So, but what was nice about it is, if I had built all this stuff for 6 people, I would have said no to anything else added. If I had built up, multi-view for that. This for tiles, it's like, sure, like we can do that. Anyway, so we're doing that, and then all the audio is being sent separately from Zoom ISO into Mimo. So I'll have all the channels. That way I can, what we want to do is we're going to send the Zoom ISO into we're going to send the Keynote into Zoom, but we're not going to send it to the broadcast. That way all of our panelists are synced.
Oh, thank heaven.
Yeah. So they'll all watch it at the same time. Yeah, exactly. That's the big test today. It's all beta software.
Okay.
What I'm going to tell you is no promises. It's all beta software. This is a big experiment, but we feel like it'll work pretty well. It's going to be very bare bones. We're not going crazy with it. We're just going to see if it works.
That's great.
It's
Looking
happen at
forward
10.
to that.
Yep.
So after being around for some of these second-hour experiences, it's always a question like, who's getting the feed first? Who's going to go,
exactly.
wow, that's fabulous? And everybody's going, what's fabulous?
That's what I wanted to avoid. So that's the whole pipeline is based around that one need.
Nice. Couple of quick notes. Tomorrow's show, we're going to be deconstructing the graphics we see today on the keynote. So if you want to be around for Graphics Day tomorrow, on Wednesday, Chris Gellin will be our guest. Wednesday is Audio Day, and Chris is a live band touring engineer. So it'll be an excellent day to learn about that. Thursday, Video Day, we're brainstorming about topics you'd like to see us cover over the next 6 months or so. On Friday, our topic is Apple repair and distribution. Terry McAnifas and Garrett Cleversley will give us an inside look at Apple authorized resellers and repair. And don't forget, After Hours in operation 24/7 when the main show is not. It's where our regulars and members of the group hang out. We'll be right back.